Welcome to Citizens Forum. This is being filmed on Wednesday, August the 27th in the Memorial Arena. I'd like to start by thanking our volunteer crew and the Shaw staff that makes it all happen. The first part of Citizens Forum is always the Walter and Jack Show. And Walter, I'll start off with Mount Polly. It's been about 3 weeks since the Mount Polly environmental disaster happened. And I think the environmental disaster part of it is being and has been completely swept under the rug by the politicians who make up our provincial government and the media. So we've been told the water's safe, we've been told the fish are safe, and basically we're told goodbye. This is an environmental disaster, a massive amount of poison. For example, 1,000 tons of arsenic. 1,000 tons of arsenic. Who even knows what that means? Arsenic is harmful to the health of any living thing virtually at virtually any level. And here we have 1,000 tons, as well as mercury, lead, cadmium, phosphorus, and 100 other things whose names I don't know, all poured into our environment. And now, 3 weeks later, not one word. All of that poison is going into our environment, it's going into the wildlife, the plants, the fish, us, and it just infuriates me that the government and the media are now saying, well, we're going to find out why the dam collapsed, and we're going to make sure it never happens again. But tell us how we're being poisoned. Tell us how our food is being poisoned. They won't. The air is being poisoned. This stuff is blowing in the wind.
Well, you know, boy, we have lots of time to cover this in more detail, but you know, how about the mercury, Jack? Because I had done a little bit of research, so-called one time, on mercury, trying to figure out how much mercury was in compact fluorescent lights, and I read that mercury, when it's released into the environment, into water, turns into methyl mercury, which is a much more accessible sort of chemical that can be absorbed by animals. And also methyl mercury is bioaccumulative. Mercury doesn't go away just because an animal ate it. It never goes away. It bioaccumulates and it moves up through the food chain. And mercury is a well-known toxin that actually destroys brain tissue.
Well, here's 5 tons of mercury, whatever that means.
So yeah, so that enters the food chain. It eventually gets into fish, perhaps. That'll get into wildlife. It'll get into people. It doesn't go away. It's now a burden on all our health. The other thing is, it's just the astonishing, you know, it never ceases to amaze me how they count on the public of being pretty well, you know, just you'd have to be almost brain dead to believe this stuff that they're saying, and they're just seeming to be setting records constantly on how badly they can report on a story. It's a sad thing.
So I'm just saying, you know, it's up to us. People, phone your politicians, phone your media. At least we should be told the facts. That's all I'm saying. Tell us over and over again so we can know about it and learn about it. What was in that pond? And it's not a pond, it's a lake. It's 4 square kilometers. Tell us what was there and tell us what the impacts are going to be. This is not secret stuff. The scientists know it. You know what's going to happen. Maybe there's going to be some surprises we'll find out along the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years as this poison moves through our environment. But tell us, why is it being covered up? Why is it being, and I know what's being covered up, so the mining industry can continue to make profits. That's what it's all about. It's insane. And here's another one.
Let's talk. I mean, we could rename this show the Cover-Up Alert or something. But you know, the TC yesterday had an article front page about this scandal that went on with the Ministry of Health, firing staff members, and also trying to shut down research at UBC over this alleged leak of sensitive health information that the researchers were using in order to analyze whether or not drugs were being effective. And the government claims that they fired these people because of this breach of privacy. And again, you look into the story. It doesn't take a lot of digging to know that that doesn't really hold any water at all. That what they were doing is very standard practice. But what seemed strange was the people that got fired at UBC, the scientists at UBC, were doing excellent work for now almost 20 years of analyzing drugs that are wanted to be put on the market and just basically advising the government whether or not that they should be covered under the health care. And basically in one analysis, it said that it cost about $1 million a year to fund this research, and it was saving the government around $10 million a year in unwanted and unneeded drugs being launched onto the market. So it's hard to understand why they would be wanting to get gotten rid of. And also, if you looked at the staff people that were working in the Ministry of Health, they were doing excellent work at analyzing these drugs also. Now, the short answer to what's really happening here, in my opinion, is that the Liberal government is simply protecting the interests of their close friends in the pharmaceutical industry. And we're not just talking about donations to the Liberal Party, by the way, we're around $500,000 over 5 years or something like that. Substantial amount of money, that's important. But I don't think that's the full picture. I think the picture is we are being governed by lobbyists. Christy Clark was a lobbyist. She worked for the industry, worked for Enbridge. You have
well, that's
well
close, but we can't really say 100%
well whatever,
close.
but very closely associated. We have, like Minister Fassbender for the Minister of Education, also a lobbyist. I think the real issue, and by the way, with this pharmaceutical industry, it's around $1.5 billion a year. The great thing is in British Columbia, we have the best record in Canada for provincial government of not introducing drugs that are harming people, because a lot of the drugs that do get introduced harm people and kill them. So we're saving lives by not introducing these drugs. But the profits are down in British Columbia because the big pharmaceutical companies want these products launched on the market. Whether or not it harms people or not doesn't seem to be an issue. It's just a bottom line is profits. And in my analysis, I always said the government is the corporation. The only way to look at the way the Liberals operate, and as far as I'm concerned, the NDP, is they operate like it is a corporation. The ministers are window dressing, more or less. The deputy ministers are the ones that are really pulling the strings behind the scenes, and the staff and the bureaucracy in these ministries have been there for years and years. They're very closely associated with these industries, and a lot of them, there's a revolving door in and out of government. And the bottom line to me is that the public has to understand that it's not a mystery, Jack. The bottom line is money, big pharma taking control of our government, and we should stop that. All these things that have happened recently with the government paying off these lawsuits and saying, oh, firing these people were a mistake, but we really don't know. They never really gave us an explanation of why they were fired in the first place. The breach of information usage and privacy really wasn't true.
So you're saying they were fired, the whole thing happened because the pharmaceutical industry wanted all of these tests shut down. Because
they wanted these tests to go away. They wanted these people to go away. They're cutting into their bottom line. And that's the way, in my opinion, this story should be viewed. And if the Times columnists or any of these other news outlets really wanted to be truthful and really allowed their reporters to do their job, because I think most of these reporters know what's really gone on.
Well, I've got exactly the same opinion, that it was, they were fired and the thing was shut down in order to protect the interests of the pharmaceutical industry. So I saw that story in the TC also, and I read through it waiting to even have inclination, a glimpse, a suggestion that that was the story, but I don't think I saw that. All I saw was, oh yeah, somebody made a mistake, we're sorry, you know, we'll pay you off.
Well, I mean, I'm speculating too. I can't bring forward to you this hard evidence. But, you know, if you look at what's happened and what's transpired, and, you know, how, you know, by thinking these things through, the story does not work the way it's being told right now. There's just such huge gaps in the government story. Why are they paying off all these people that they fired and saying it was a mistake? Well, but guess what? We'll never know, because those people are all being paid not to talk.
That's right. And that's, you know, it just goes on. And these are the fundamental problems. I mean, we've got to solve the problems. And the problems are, we need a media that's telling us the truth, and we need a more democratic system of government so that our politicians can't screw us anymore, but they've got to start to work for us. I mean, we're talking life and death. The Mount Poly thing is life and death. Fukushima is life and death. Poverty and homelessness is life and death. Our healthcare system is life and death. And none of these things are working on our behalf. Everything is controlled from above by this small group of lunatic corporations and their ownership. And they're doing very well. They're rolling in money and wealth and power. But the people of Canada are out of the loop, and we can't have that anymore. I just want to mention very quickly amalgamation. The question that is being asked in Victoria about amalgamation is this: are you in favor of reducing the number of municipalities in Greater Victoria through amalgamation? I'll read it one more time. Are you in favor of reducing the number of municipalities in Greater Victoria through amalgamation? As I said last week, I could answer yes to that question, but they've got to ask us the second question: do you want Victoria to amalgamate? The people of Victoria should be asked that question. And to that I'd say no. And, you know, let people vote as they want. But to me, it seems like the question is set up to get a yes answer, and then they'll pretend that that means everybody wants amalgamation. And I'm sick and tired of the politicians doing that to us. Provincially, federally, municipally, they're all the same.
You know, amalgamation, you know why they're talking about it? Because they couldn't ram through that wacko sewage treatment plant plan. I mean, let's face it, I mean, we've spent a lot of time looking at that issue on this show, and you've done a number of great interviews. I've been trying to piece this together for a long time, and really, when it comes right down to it, a few people are going to make a whole lot of money on that deal, and we're going to be left holding the bag on that. I think this sort of question should be posed, but I think it should be reconfigured also, and maybe other municipalities may choose that they might want to amalgamate. But you know, the system is not nearly as bad as anybody's making out. I don't see that big a problem with having these smaller councils, especially if we can keep bigger projects from happening. The other thing, Jack, is, you know, something I hope we can do is find out what councillors were on the CRD, what councillors were pushing this sewage treatment plant through, and are they going to stand up now in this next election and admit that they were the people sitting in those chairs pushing this agenda forward, or are they going to have some type of change of heart, or hope that we all forget? And I don't think any of the major media outlets are going to dig into that story and let the public know who was pushing this agenda, so when we go to the polls, we can say, you know, I'm not going to put an X beside that name because I know what they were doing.
Well, some of the names are Frank Leonard, the mayor of Saanich, Dean Fortin, the mayor of Victoria, Ben Izzet supports the current CRD sewage treatment plant. Jeff Young certainly does. Leif Wergeland from Saanich. I don't want to mention any more names because I'm just not sure, but you know, I mean, these names everybody should know. Whether you think it's good or bad, we should at least know the names, but the media is keeping them quiet. They're protecting people. And you know, with amalgamation, we should have more information. We've got no information. The vote's coming up in a few months. Nobody's telling us any facts or figures.
Yeah.
Just, hey, vote, and vote yes. So
yeah, we're going to be digging to try to find
the people
issues.
who run this city have a plan for this city. And basically, it's probably to turn us into the next Vancouver.
Yeah.
Do the people of Victoria want it? Who cares? They don't care what we want. You want to talk a bit about the public education, or?
You know, it's all bad news, isn't it, Jack? I mean, we try our best. I'd love to come and talk with something that's good. You'd think that somebody would do something good even by accident, but they work very hard at not doing anything any good. Now, of course, the teachers are. This is one of the biggest struggles between any entities in our province. This is what's happening between the teachers and the government right now. The government, if you look at the polling right now, it's like overwhelming support for the teachers right now, wanting the teachers to have a fair deal. The teachers are looking for better conditions in those classrooms for them and the students. They want the best outcome they can get for the students. The government has their heels dug in right now. They're meeting today with the head of the teachers union. I think because they feel they have to, just for appearances. But I don't think we're going to see much budging there. And really what it really boils down to is that it doesn't seem to matter. If 100% of the British Columbians want a fair settlement, I don't think Christy Clark or Peter Fasttalker, what's his name?
Fassbender, yeah.
Fackbender, they're just reading the script, Jack. The government is the corporation. They've been given the lines on how this is going to go. They're being told not to give in. The corporate agenda is to destroy this union, and the public has to get behind the teachers because it really is the people being represented by the teachers for a fair and just society, a civilized society. And if we let this happen, Jack, it'll be the biggest mistake we'll ever have made in this province if the government is able to smash this union. And this is what it's all about. The bottom line is to smash this union. They're just reading their lines from their corporate masters that carry about this agenda.
Well, we're going to do better starting next week. Thank you very much, Walter.
Always a pleasure,
Yeah,
Jack.
those are the things we have to do. Thanks for watching this segment of Citizens Forum. Welcome to segment 2 of Citizens Forum. In this segment, Walter and I are joined by People's Para-Pundit, Andrew Hunter. And Andrew, maybe you can just tell us what a People's Para-Pundit is.
Well, the People's Para-Pundit is a person who does commentary outside the box on behalf of the citizens.
So, punditry, non-corporate punditry.
Outside the corporate box on behalf of the people.
Sounds great. Walter?
Now,
Oh, wait, right, I
Okay.
forgot to say, what we're talking about in this segment is drones, blowback, and ISIS. And one more time, drones, blowback, and ISIS.
so yeah, 3 different ideas seemingly, but I think you're going to tell us they're related. How about starting off with just, let's do a little history of what drones are, an explanation of what drones are and how they're being used today.
Yes, Walter. Well, drones are a component of the military-industrial complex, and they are basically unmanned aerial vehicles that are either weaponized or non-weaponized. And the latest news for our Victoria viewers is that drones have officially arrived in Victoria. So that is a very sad sign for all of us.
Now, how would a drone be used, say, in Victoria? I mean, what was that story about?
Well, the drones are used in 2 applications. One is military, and one is commercial. Now, Amazon.com is going to be using drones for delivery, which, if you could imagine a very small, unmanned aerial vehicle delivering your parcel in your backyard. Apparently that's what Amazon is going to be doing, and that's what a commercial application of drones is. And the military application of drones is what the Americans are doing in Yemen, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Syria, you name it, for targeting innocent people and civilians.
And people live in terror of those things. I mean, people are having severe psychological problems because they know they can be killed literally from nowhere at any time. It's really having an impact. We're never told about it, but and you mentioned Oak Bay, Walter. Yeah, in Oak Bay, somebody had just bought or has a drone, and he is using that to fly into people's yards, or I think in the case of the Oak Bay, it was condos, so taller buildings, and just spying on people. So the police were called, and blah blah blah.
So that would have been just flowing like a model airplane. That kind of an idea, just
Yeah. But in the States,
hand
yes, in the States, I think now a lot of police forces are getting drones. And since what happens in the States always comes to Canada, I guess we can expect our police forces will also have drones, and we'll probably thank them for doing it at the time, because they will manipulate us into thinking that's a good idea.
So I've seen on the internet and on the news, you'll often see this video camera showing the ground. There'll be something moving down there, and all of a sudden, boom, and it all disappears. Now, is that what a drone is doing with the camera, and then just firing a weapon at those things?
Well, I would imagine so. The military use of drones, the weaponized drones, obviously come complete with cameras, because that's what the commercial drones have.
Yeah.
They have the cameras. So those cameras can capture the targeting of a site or an individual or a truck or whatever it is. And we see the video on television all the time. More recently, there was a video, courtesy of Vancouver, of a drone that was hovering outside of a high-rise. So unfortunately, the drones have arrived in Vancouver, and now just more recently in Victoria. The commercial application I'm talking about.
Do you have to have some type of, you obviously have to have some clearances if you want to fly an airplane. What sort of authorization do you have to fly a drone in a city?
Well, that's a good question, Walter. I'm not a pilot or anything, and I don't speak with a lot of aviation knowledge. But I would imagine you have to file a flight path with Transport Canada. So I think the citizens of Victoria should be asking the governments, local, municipal, federal, are these commercial drones filing their flight paths
I don't
to
think
fly
they're
over
commercial yet. I think it's just
residential
somebody who's bought a drone and is flying it into people's yards. That's all. That's what's happening now. And there are no rules, from what I've heard. There's no rules and no laws.
Right.
So go ahead and do it. Just like, as you said, flying a model airplane. or
So the
something.
next demonstrations that one might have at the legislature, whether it's the great Poli disaster or teachers or whatever, don't be surprised if we see these drones flying above us, taking surveillance photographs of who's demonstrating. It's a pretty scary development, and I think the people should be outraged that these drones have arrived and they are being used commercially without our volition.
And when they talk about drones, they always say 15 militants were killed by a drone attack. But a friend of mine told me that, according to the U.S. military, a militant, somebody on the other side, is any male between the ages of about 15 and 85, right? So in other words, they just kill people, and they call them militants, but they don't care who they're killing. I mean, it's mass murder being carried out by Obama. And
I would agree, Jack, and I can just elaborate on what you said earlier. The fallout from this, the use of weaponized drones in countries like Yemen, and again, this is all
Yemen,
fact.
Pakistan,
Exactly.
Afghanistan.
But apparently, from what I've heard, the children of Yemen have been so terrorized now that then when they go to bed at night, they can't sleep, and the parents are very worried because these children can only dream of the sound of drones flying overhead. So we've already seen the fallout from these killing machines in terms of the children and how they're being terrorized by their use all around the world.
That is very troubling. The psychological part of it, is could really, really warp a whole generation.
Yeah, we have to say, because nobody says it. Nobody in North America is allowed to say it. But, I mean, can we say that the United States today is the #1 terrorist nation in the world? I mean, in terms of actually creating terror, who's doing more of it?
Well, I
than-
wouldn't say it's not only the United States.
And I don't mean the American people, it's the people who run the United States.
The another drone incident that's happened recently, which you wouldn't hear about on the news, was the fact that Israel used drones to over Iran.
Over.
The Iranians have shot down an Israeli drone
Oh.
because the drones were hovering around their nuclear development plants and everything. So we don't hear about that, but that's a fact. So the drones are being weaponized around the world, and they're being used by most nations that are not on the good side of what should be happening.
That's
The
interesting.
children are being terrorized as a result.
So part two, it's drones, blowback, and ISIS. So what's blowback?
Well, blowback is a term that describes the fallout from a sort of a unilateral action taken overseas by a nation such as the U.S. I mean, one could argue that the Boston bombings, for instance, by the so-called people that did it, really, to me, is a result of the U.S. foreign policy in Chechnya. From what I understand, these alleged individuals behind the Boston bombings must have been terrorized by what the U.S. was doing in conjunction with Russia in Chechnya. Therefore, that's what blowback is. It's a fallout from a unilateral move overseas, which results in an equal action or reaction back in the country of origin.
Yeah.
That's what blowback
Of course, with the Boston bombing, we don't really know. I mean, the whole official story, like the official story of 9/11 and the official story of weapons of mass destruction, and so many official stories, you can't believe it. I mean, I don't believe the official story of the Boston bombing. I don't believe anything that I'm told by our governments and spokespeople and media anymore. I just don't believe it. So I don't believe that story.
It's possible. But, you know,
Possible.
the thing is, like with blowback, and you can see where this is not unwanted in many ways. If you have a national security state like the United States, which really operates on the concept of having all these enemies that the government has to protect its citizens from foreign enemies. If you don't have a good enemy, you have to create one, don't you? And you can see how this, say, the use of drones and the use of interventions and all sorts of things in other countries can cause, you know, some very real dislike and sometimes call it hatred of Americans, and thus would justify taking actions against Americans and attacking Americans. And I think the American military and those that are controlling the agenda might like that. Might say, okay, here we have it. We have to protect you as citizens. We need more weapons. We need more drones, maybe.
Well, that's what blowback is, and blowback really is eternal. One couldn't really say blowback is the last 50 years of U.S. intervention overseas. One could go back 1,000 years. I think I mentioned to you before, Walter, the Foley so-called beheading incident that took place recently, which is the world is being subject to daily in the news media. As an example, I was watching this program called A Short History of the World on television recently, and they talked about the battle between the Christians and the Ottomans in the 16th century. And to make a very long story short, they were fighting in Cyprus, and this was AD 1570. And what happened was there were the Ottomans were taking on the Christians on Cyprus, and the Ottoman leader of the military Ottomans was beheaded in Cyprus, and his head was shown as a form of superiority for the Christians. So one could ask the question, is the Foley incident and that action of beheading a recent phenomena, or has it been going on for hundreds, perhaps thousands of years? Therefore, the creation of ISIS has only been a blowback from the whole Muslim-Christian confrontation and conflicts that have happened over the last 550 years.
And we don't even, I mean, for me, when I hear the story about ISIS, I don't believe that either. I mean, for all we know, The Americans are funding and training and controlling ISIS, just like Osama bin Laden worked for the CIA, you know, going back 20 or 25 years. Just like, I mean, I was growing up during the Vietnam War, and I remember how that war started in earnest. I mean, there was already a warfare there, but as I was growing up, what happened was an American destroyer was attacked in international waters by torpedo boats from North Vietnam, and that's what created the pretext for the huge American increase in that war, in which probably 1.5 million innocent people were killed. And later we found out there was no attack. The whole thing was phony. It was all a pack of lies. So that whole war was based on a pack of lies. And now they tell us about ISIS. I'm sorry, I don't believe it anymore. I don't know what the truth is, but I do know I will no longer believe any stories they tell us, because they've lied to me my whole life. And when I say they, I mean the politicians, the corporate media, CBC, CTV, Global, all of them. I don't believe one word of it anymore, which isn't to say I'm right, but that's after a lifetime of lies. How stupid do I have to be to keep believing it?
35 years ago, we had the U.S. supplying a militant Islamic group called the Mujahideen in order to take on the Russians. So fast forward to 2014, we had the same playbook from the same CIA template. In other words, we'll create something which will take on the world and say, oh my God, we have a terror group, we must send in the drones to take them out. Oh, and by the way, here's a video of what they can do to journalists, American journalists overseas.
So that would fit the model with Saddam Hussein, also, who was an American, you know, an ally or an operative of the Americans, who they eventually apparently killed. And you know, it seems like bin Laden was an operative. They apparently killed him. I say apparently because I don't know what really happened to these guys. And so ISIS, here we have, but what really is strange for me is I see these guys ripping around in these big Hummers, and you know, they got some sophisticated weaponry. So how does a bunch of guys just wander around the desert and all of a sudden they come upon several hundred of these, you know, machines? And somebody's got to be paying the bill. You know, these guys have, you know, this is a lot of weaponry. You got to, you know, you're moving a lot of, there's a lot of personnel involved. And it's just, the story seems so strange to me. This has got to cost millions of dollars a day.
And it is a coincidence too that the leader that we saw on the video just happened to have a British accent, which made it much easier to understand. Now, if I was trying to stage a legitimate video of a legitimate group, I would be speaking Arabic. I wouldn't be speaking with a British accent, which smells a lot of MI6 to me. And as we know, British intelligence has been in the Middle East actively and destructively for the last 95 years. That's almost 100 years. And so therefore, they have a long track record of intervention and creation of these so-called militant Islamic groups that are terrorizing the world, and therefore America must rush to take them out and, you know, help the Iraqis go back to where they should be. Yet we forget that Iraq was created almost 100 years ago as a result of the colonial powers of England, France, and the US divvying up the Middle East to create satellite colonies such as Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq. Therefore, in the end part of World War I, which we are celebrating here in Canada this year, courtesy of our government, we should be looking at the real history of World War I and the real history of what happened in the Middle East post World War I. Namely, we get puppet rulers set up in Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, and Iraq, put in by the English, French, and American colonial powers. And these people would be accessing the resources in the area, namely the oil of Iraq. So Iraq has been in turmoil for 100 years. And we mustn't forget what the British Prime Minister Lloyd George said. in 1919 when he said, bomb those niggers, when he was saying, bomb those Iraqis, when the British took over Iraq in 1919.
So the story, you know, and I love the fact that you're putting historical context into this analysis, you know, and I try, and many of us try, but yeah, because the history is not well known about how the facts of what really did happen, and many times the politics in the Middle East, particularly, and I mean I've been trying to follow it for many years, and it's because all the reporting seems to come in the middle of the problem. There's no real past, and you really can't see into the future very far. You just see a report, you see some attacks occurred, you have the Israelis attacking Gaza Strip, and they're calling that a war when really, you know, it's not really a war when you have like 2,200 die on one side and a handful of Israelis die. That's not really a war. It's, you know, so it really makes you wonder, you know, what's causing this turmoil. You know, Noam Chomsky called Israel the unsinkable battleship for the West in the Middle East, and he felt that that was one of the major motivators to create the State of Israel. So, you know, the West, meaning Northern Europe and the United States, could exert influence on the region and have, let's say, a military base there. Do you see it that way?
Well, I think that's what we have to do. We have to look at the history more closely, and especially if we're being told by the federal government, the Canadian government, that we must celebrate the centennial of the First World War. And I think it's for the citizens of Victoria and Canada to examine the real history, the real facts of the First World War, how it started, who benefited, and how the Middle East and Europe, including Ukraine, was carved up. Now, if you just look at the facts of the end of First World War, what do we have? We have Russia being convinced by Germany, who's trying to hold on to win the war. You guys, we don't want to fight you, so we'll let the communists rule Russia. You guys must stop the war so we can send all our troops to the front to face the French and the English and the Canadians and the rest of the imperial powers. And what happened was, after the war, a certain part of Russia was ceded from Russia, namely Ukraine. The Ukraine was taken away from Russia in 1919. That's 100 years ago. So when we look at the situation in Ukraine, we see there are many actors who claim to have their legitimacy in terms of who should be in Ukraine and who shouldn't be. So that's why blowback is important to look at, whether it's 35 years ago, the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, or 100 years post World War I, and how the Ottoman Empire was carved up and how the Russian Empire was carved up.
So you're sewing the war or the turmoil in the Ukraine together with what's happening in the Middle East. I think that's a very, very important thing to do, because again, the media tends to report in isolation what's happening in Ukraine. It doesn't seem to make any sense, but nobody can really figure out what exactly is going on because there's no historical analysis. And I think that's a great thing you're doing there by sewing these regions together with the geopolitics and the history. We just have to have more of this sort of parapunditry going on, Andrew. And, you know, I think practicing thinking outside the box is so important to do that.
Well, I call it the loser's version. I think everyone should ask themselves, do we accept the official version, or do we want to examine the loser's version? Now, the loser's version is the version of the people who don't win the war or win the conflict, and what really happened to them or to their nation. And the First World War is a great example of that. Germany was purposefully, mostly by the French, they were put on their knees. They were economically devastated. They were socially terrorized post World War as a lesson to say this will never happen again. And one famous journalist, sorry, it was J.K. Galbraith. I remembered his name. The famous economist J.K. Galbraith warned against that. He said, in a nutshell, to paraphrase him, beware of the demonization and the isolation of Germany, because it will come back to haunt us. And guess what? 20 years later, it happened. And the same thing happened there. Germany was armed. Now, how did Germany build up its military complex? How does ISIS build up its military complex? There's no way, as I said rather facetiously, that they went to a Walmart in Lebanon and bought the latest arms. I think it has to be asked, how do these organizations get their funding? How do they get their arms? How do they get their logistics? How do they get their communications? Outside sources. Now, some would say the Saudi Arabia and Qatar and various other countries are funding ISIS, and perhaps Iran on a lesser basis. That's for discussion, that's for debate. But certainly it couldn't be a self-funding, self-actualization of a bunch of marauders who are tired of fooling around in Syria and say, well, it's time to go to Iraq, and by the way, we'll have video and the best arms that money can buy. However, they don't have any money. And the sad part is the radicals that they've so-called imported from Canada, America, and Britain. And again, one should ask, how do we know that an ISIS leader who's on a video saying with the head of James Foley and he's got a British accent, one has to ask, that's much too convenient for the worldwide global audience that mostly speaks English. To me, it would make more sense if he spoke Arabic.
Andrew, thank you very much. All of us, we have to know more of the reality of what's going on all issues. Thanks for watching this segment of Citizens Forum. Hello, welcome to the last segment of Citizens Forum. Before we start, I'd like to thank again our volunteer crew and the Shaw staff that makes it all happen. Our guest in this segment is Scott Attrill. Scott lives in Esquimalt, and he's running for the mayoralty of Esquimalt. So Scott, maybe you just want to introduce yourself and tell us why.
Sure. Hi, Jack. My name is Scott Attrill. I'm the owner of Floyd's Hairstyling for Men in Esquimalt and have been for the last 15 years. I've been self-employed for 30 years. I know Esquimalt very well. I grew up in Esquimalt. I graduated out of Esquimalt High in 1981. It's been a home to me for a very long time, for 30 years. I have lived in other parts of the city, but a lot of it has been in Esquimalt. I've seen no growth in Esquimalt, none whatsoever. I've seen a lot of fighting, a lot of wasted monies. I've seen the mayor of Esquimalt arguing about what police service should be utilized. I've seen not really any development or any kind of business core developed in Esquimalt. It's always been the same. I'd like to see that changed. I'm seeing a lot of, in Esquimalt and all over the city, I'm seeing wasted monies with flower pots and bike lanes. And the idea of traffic calming, where the CRD has a plan, it's called the Cycling and Pedestrian Master Plan. I'm sure you've hit on this, right?
I don't really know anything about it.
Oh, the Cycling and Pedestrian Master Plan is basically it's the basis of how they get the money for traffic calming. So the green tax that you have on the pumps is collected at the pumps and held by the federal government. The municipalities then put in for a grant, and the grant has to have three things. They have to reduce lanes of traffic, they have to increase green spaces, and they have to increase bike lanes. That's why you're seeing this continuation of all these different things going on all over the city, but they all look the same. The key is, it's like social engineering. It's trying to get people out of their cars and into bikes, which is fine, but you can't put them on the roads. Okay, so when the municipality puts the grant in, it goes to the CRD dots the I's, crosses the T's, and then it goes to the Union of British Columbia municipality. It's quite a mouthful. That's why people get bored of politics, right? What happens after that is they award the money to the municipality, given that they've done all three of these things in their project. And that money is then sent from the federal government to the municipalities. It says 100% federally funded. Well, it's a lie. The people that funded it are the people in their cars, and every time they buy gas, they pay the tax. It gives them more money to spend in this direction, which gives you less lanes of traffic.
Now, I used to be a bike driver, a bike rider. I don't anymore. I had an accident. But, I mean, I'm happy, I think, to have what they call traffic calming and less lanes of traffic. I mean, that's my, just somebody says that, I think, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Am I wrong?
Yeah,
Okay.
you are, because ICBC has people lining up out the door to get their licenses, and they're not getting licenses to drive bikes.
So there's going to be, you're saying there's going to be more traffic, so we
Yeah.
have to have more roads.
And even if we go and say, well, this is a green initiative and we want to reduce our carbon footprint,
yeah.
well, what happens when they perfect the electric car? Now you're having all these cars stuck in minimal amounts of lanes. For what purpose? And people stuck waiting to get home. For what purpose? The Esquimalt in particular is a jackpot, because you have two of the largest employers in a 1 kilometer area,
Right.
D&D and Shipyard, some 8 to 10,000 people Monday to Friday. You take away lanes in that area right between the base and Shipyard, it's not only going to increase the amount of congestion, it's also going to create a problem for emergency services. You think about when that fishing ship hit the Winnipeg. One day before, the Protector was in the place that the Winnipeg was. That's a single-hulled ship, and it was holding 1.2 million liters of diesel at the time. If it punctured the tanks, we would have an environmental disaster at the very least. You have less lanes. You can't get the men and the women of the mind to get on site to contain the emergency
Right.
as quickly as possible. You can't get people evacuated out of the area. Remember the Russian freighter when that went up? How many police, how many fire departments came to get people out of their houses? You reduce lanes in that area, it is going to end in a disaster.
Okay. You wanted to talk about your vision for Esquimalt, so I guess this is one part of it.
One part is to keep Esquimalt free-flowing, to let people come and go as they please. The second part is to get all the people that work in Esquimalt, or a great percentage of them, to call Esquimalt their home. And what I want to do in that direction is I want to eliminate the antiquated height restrictions in building. Right now we just had 2 towers, 10 stories tall, canceled. They were denied the building permit. And the reason for that is unknown. They just were denied it. I think it's because the people down in that area, and what we're going to talk about, the NIMBYs, right? The people down in that area didn't want it because the shadow from the building was going to go across the marina, and that's where Mayor Barbara Desjardins has most of her support, or a great many voters from that area. If they approved it, she would probably lose a great deal of the support for her in that area.
But if people don't want it, I mean, I wish they would do that in Victoria. When people don't want something, don't do it, because they just kind of ram it down our throats.
Well, in Esquimalt in particular, the only place we can go, we can't build out, so we
That's
can only
true.
build up, right? And with the infrastructure costs being so high for even just like the Johnson Street Bridge, not that that's Esquimalt's problem, but it is Victoria's problem. When the infrastructure costs go so high, it has to be shared by the number of houses, the number of tax-paying houses. And if you don't have that number going up, then the taxes keep going up and up and up, and pretty soon people can't afford their own homes.
How do you think people feel in general in Esquimalt about going up? Are people like the idea, or do people like Esquimalt more the way it is now?
18% of Esquimalt's population voted in the last election. When I go to a town council meeting, there might be 7 to 5, 10 people in there, maybe. The mayor says it's a bumper crowd, there's 15 people there. The largest crowd I ever saw was when they were trying to get that permit passed for the 10-story building 2 tower.
Right.
And it should have passed. It fit into the city zoning proposals. It should have passed, but it was just wrong timing. The guy shouldn't have brought it up when he did. He should have waited till after the election.
Right.
Right? What I see is selling the ocean views and the mountain views, putting condos up as high as 25 stories like they do in the Songhees, all along where the water is. Maybe not where the homes are already located, because of course they have vested interests there, but there are pockets of Esquimalt that are downtrodden. They need to be replaced and needs to be ripped up. Constance Avenue is a great example. It's right behind the base. There's going to be very little people that are going to be upset with a big building going there. It's not going to block anyone's view. and anyone that buys in that area is going to have the sun rising in the morning and the sun setting at night over the mountains. It's beautiful.
That's true. You know, it's. I mean, how do we put additional housing into our towns and cities without hopefully disturbing other people too much? I mean, and there are ways to do it. I mean, there are places where I guess it can be built with. I don't know that part of Esquimalt, but you know, if people want it, then I'm for it.
Yeah, the most complaining I heard about that building, that 10 stories, 2 towers, was it was going to take away their sun.
Well, that's important.
Well, it is,
for
but it's
people.
not gone the whole day.
Yeah.
The sun moves.
You wanted to talk about the CRD's sewage treatment plan.
Yeah, we can touch on that. 9 years ago, a good friend of mine and colleague, Keith Martin, said this is a boondoggle.
And he was the member of parliament.
Yeah, I was an old reformer. I was the guy banging on the doors. We didn't have social media then. I got so many doors slammed on me, I can't even count. But the septic treatment plant and the CRD, Keith Martin said it 9 years ago. This is not necessary. The ocean takes care of it fine. The University of Victoria and the University of Washington have both stated categorically that we're not doing any damage to the ocean. These are the intellects. And the people that are elected into the CRD have refused to listen to them. I don't know why.
Well, my own feeling is it's a lot of money going from public hands into private hands.
Sure.
So I guess that's why.
Well, Stantec.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
one word answer. Right.
I don't know. I mean, I'm very, very, very disappointed in the politicians of this region who have been involved in that, just because they won't even listen when people say, no, we don't want it. They say, well, we're going to make you want it.
Well, when the intellectuals say, no, you don't need it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yet the federal government says you have to do it.
Yes.
And then the provincial government backs up and says, we're going to give you some money too.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, these people that we don't know start lining up at the doors looking for that monies. Now, Barbara Desjardins started out first saying what I'm saying. Rely on science. If science says it's not required, don't do it. Now she wants to make her own septic treatment plant underground next to City Hall under a 12-story building. Wrong plan, wrong idea. You don't put a septic treatment plant downtown. You got restaurants, you got all kinds of businesses in that area. There's even a residential area behind where she wants to put it. There's a great big huge daycare off to the other side that has about 150 children. You have an earthquake and that thing ruptures.
So you stand by the idea that we may very well not have to do anything at all.
We should not do anything.
And I mean, that would be my first choice too, because that seems to be what the science is saying.
The day that science changes and says we are doing irreparable damage to the ocean,
Right.
then my opinion will change.
Yeah.
When we push things into the ocean, whether it's our waste, the only thing we have to make sure is we don't throw pharmaceuticals, paints, oils
Yes.
into the ocean.
Yes.
And that's collection at source.
Yes.
Right?
You wanted to talk about building permits and how that
yes.
takes place.
You know, the Legion, I've been following this for a long time. I've had my business in Esquimalt for 15 years. I've been watching this Legion struggle to get its building permit.
And the Legion wants to build a fairly tall
The first design
residential building.
was over the limit that Esquimalt allowed. That was part of the problem. But it's been 11 years.
Since the first application went in.
11 years, and Mayor Barbara Desjardins was as a councillor or as a mayor for 9 of those 11 years. You think a building permit should take 11 years? Imagine the building costs, how they went up in 11 years.
So why, I mean, I'm sure other buildings have been built in Esquimalt during that time. Is it that particular thing is?
There have been some built, but not many.
So you'd just like to see more construction, residential construction in Esquimalt?
I'm more in the lines of what Stu did out in Langford, is make the process efficient, but quick. Get the jobs going, get people working, get the building going, and then have the development work around that. You have more people living in a square area, then you have more opportunity for restaurants, more opportunities for barbershops, more opportunities for almost every kind of business. Right now, the Esquimalt core is just eroding.
I'm sorry, right now?
The Esquimalt core is
Core.
just eroding. You go down there, it looks like the ghetto.
How about regional CRD issues? You mentioned the cycling and pedestrian master plan, but you wanted to talk a bit about Admiral's Road.
Yeah, well, Admiral's Road, we have a cycling road going behind. It's the E&N Trail. It goes behind the building where I work.
Okay.
It's 10 feet wide. It goes from Esquimalt Road where the railway tracks are,
Yeah.
down past my building and ends at the Songhees Nation. Because the CRD, in their infinite wisdom, didn't talk with the Songhees Nation about this bike path. So it goes literally 10 feet wide, beautifully paved, all the way down, and it stops and it's gravel. And then it picks up on the other side in View Royal. They don't have the permission of the Songhees to go through their land. They didn't get it before they built these two parts of the trail. The CRD keeps making mistakes, like it's a $17 million purchase in Viewfield Road. Are you kidding me? That's just subject to the approval of this area being utilized for this purpose. And Mayor Barbara Desjardins should have been yelling it out loud. She should have been screaming no. She could go into the newspapers and say, this is what they're going to do. They're going to buy that property up. I met some people that were actually working in the building at the time when the CRD members came in, and the owner played them like a fiddle. And they just gave up $17 million of our tax-paying money for something that's never was going to be able to be utilized for said purpose.
Yeah, how, is there a better way of doing it? I mean, besides the politicians themselves being better trained and doing a better job for us?
Well, are they better trained or are they corrupt? That's the question. I mean, if there's corruption involved, which in the case of the septic treatment plant, I believe there is, if you're not listening to science and science is screaming out loud, don't do it. It's not necessary. And somebody says, still, we need to do it. And there's a pile of money at the end of the rainbow. I bet you that there's some influence. I'm not saying any names on the CRD. I'm just saying that when it comes to being pushed more and more, it becomes more and more obvious that something's on.
Yeah, something is definitely wrong. Scott, we've only got 1 minute left. Scott Atchell running for the mayoralty in Esquimalt. Is there any other issue you'd like to touch on, the police or just Esquimalt in general?
I think the Esquimalt people need to be engaged. I think the town council meetings should be taped. I think there should be less in-camera meetings. I think that people should go to their meetings. It's always held at 7 o'clock. And sometimes we're just too busy with our lives to go. So we should be able to see what's going on a website. It should be recorded and
Could even be live streamed.
Well, sure it could, if they have the time. But if it's recorded, then they can play it back whenever they want. But the infrastructures that you're going to pay for in the near future are going to oversee the monies you're going to be available out of your own pocket for taxes. It's going to get too expensive. You're going to have more people live in the area. You're going to have development to be able to afford what's coming down the pipe in the near future.
City elections are coming up in November, only a few months away, so keep all of this in mind. Thank you, Scott.
You're welcome.
And thanks for watching Citizens Forum.